Shalom, guys. Welcome back to another episode here at Just Shot View Ministry with Kasa Yarah. Thank you again for being there. Like I always say, if you like the content that we have on our channel, like and subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, put it on the comment section down below. So we're going to continue with the weekly Torah portion. This week's Torah portion is Bo, and it's in Exodus chapter 10. And it's the continuation of this interaction with Moses and Pharaoh, right? And this battle of who is the one in control, who is the one that has the power and the ability to maintain order and peace. And so Pharaoh is responsible for that. He is dependent on understanding that he is the one that has to maintain Egypt's order, justice, and right now his whole kingdom is crumbling. And so we will continue that and we'll elaborate. So let's get to it. So like I said, this week's Torah portion is Exodus. Is in Exodus chapter 10, verse 1 through chapter 13, verse 16. The half Torah portion is Jeremiah chapter 46, verses 13 to 28. And the Brit Chadashah, the New Testament portion, is Romans 9, 14 through 29. Last week's Torah portion, Yarah, reported how Pharaoh refused to listen to Moses. And Moses pleads for Israel's freedom, despite 7 devastating plagues that came upon Egypt in God's name. In this week's Torah portion, Bo, the battle between God and Pharaoh comes to a dramatic conclusion. The last 3 of the 10 plagues are unleashed upon Egypt. A swarm of locusts devour all the crops and greenery, and a palpable darkness enveloped the land for 3 days and nights. And all the firstborn of Egypt were killed at the stroke of midnight of the 15th of the month of Nisan. We have to understand that there is a phrase that is used, and in last year's video, I elaborated more on the last 2 videos, last year and the year before that. We talked about the gods and the deities and what they represented, and looking at it from that perspective of their whole cosmological and cosmogonical society and perspective of order, right? Ma'at, right? And the last couple plagues, especially this week's Torah portion, darkness, which has to do a lot with the god of the sun, Ra, which is a very prominent god in Egypt. And so as Pharaoh crumbles and his magicians crumble, his people look at him, especially the leaders, the magicians and all these wise men that are behind Pharaoh, and they tell him, when are you going to let these people go? It is obvious that order and the true God is with Moses and the people, so let them go. And Pharaoh's ego doesn't let him look past the situation where he is not in control anymore, that God is in control, and God had chosen Moses because he was oppressing the people. Okay, Exodus 1 starts like this: Vayomer Adonai el Moshe bo el Pharaoh chi ani hikbadekti et libu wa et lib abadav lemaan shiti Tota ele bechir bo. In English, it says the following: Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials, so that I may perform these signs of mine among them, that you might tell your children and the grandchildren how I dealt harshly with the Egyptians and how I performed my signs among them, and that you may know that I am the Lord." So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, "This is what the Lord, the God of Hebrews, says. How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go so that they may worship me." That's the whole problem in this whole scenario, right? Because Pharaoh has been able to humble himself and say, God, your God, has proved that he is the God. And this example has happened through the patriarchs, right? We saw with Abraham when he went to Egypt, and how in Egypt that king was able to recognize that, hey, this man and his wife are from this God, and we will respect that, right? And obviously, the scale is not as big as this, but it's still a representation of how they recognize the deity. The same thing with Isaac, right? And so the same thing with Joseph, that recognition that, hey, this man is chosen, whether they believe is Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, right, or not. At the end of the day, those leaders in those times recognize that those men were chosen by God, and they humble themselves and let themselves be used through them. And so here, this Pharaoh decides to go against all those and establish his authority over God. And does he know that obviously he can't, right? And God is using Moses as an instrument to physically demonstrate to him that God has chosen Moses and not Pharaoh. Okay, Passover, right? So we're gonna read a little bit of Passover, not too much. We're just gonna read a little bit over it, and we'll have service this Saturday, Casa Yarah, English service, youth service. So I will elaborate a little more there, but we'll go over a little bit now. The whole pericope includes a description of the first Passover, as well as the institution of the legacy of Passover observance for the generations to come. So we have the first Passover instructions to Moses for the protection of the firstborn. Then we have the first instruction regarding the Feast of Unleavened Bread to Moses. And then we have the first Passover instructions to the people for protection of the firstborn. And then we have the first historical Passover Unleavened Bread event, the perpetual Passover ordinance to Moses, and the perpetual Feast of Unleavened Bread and ordinances to Moses, and the perpetual firstborn ordinances to the people. Okay, so this is what we have in this Torah portion when it comes to the Passover, right? So this is where it's implemented, this is where it's enacted, and this is what changes the dynamic of Israel, because everything from now on is remembering this moment in time in where God fulfilled his promise to the patriarchs. Okay, so this is a representation of God being true to his word and to what he promised to Father Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, and so any reading of the accounts of the major festivals in the Old Testament suggests that at least some of them were originally harvest festivals that are historicized, that is given an association with some historical event, thereafter tied to the event, though often retain some of the original harvest associations. It will therefore not be unusual if the roots to the Passover antedated the connection of the Exodus story. If so, the institution of Passover refers to this institution in association with an event. Certain elements in the Passover suggest that at its roots, it may be a nomadic herdsman ritual in which they sought both protection from demonic attack as they moved to summer pastures, fertility for the herds in the new breeding season. Know how the observance is centered in the family, therefore not necessitating proximity to a sanctuary, and it requires no altar. No animal is offered to deity or priestly personnel. So it's interesting, right? Because this whole ritual is done after these 9 plagues have occurred. And this is where God manifests his dominance and power over Egypt. And he establishes his authority on earth. Okay? And now it's interesting because the Passover lamb or goat, because the word se can be goat or lamb, is commonly translated as lamb. So the Passover lamb that is slaughtered and the blood is put on the doorpost. There are references, or which is, I'm still digging for this, but there are references of how lambs were connected to royal representations of Egypt, or like just like lions, and they have lion's body with a head of a lamb or a goat, and so all these things, all these elements, all communicate something to the Egyptians and to the people of Israel. And it's interesting because the blood says the blood on the doorpost purifies one's house and thus prepares it for Yahweh's presence and protection from the slaughtering angel. In this regard, it is evident that the verb pesach has its meaning of protect, as in clearly in Isaiah chapter 31 verse 5, rather than Passover. Blood is used for instances in the Mesopotamian Namburi rituals in which it is smeared on the door and keyholes to protect the house from spirits invasion. The existence of such prehistory is plausible enough, though the details of this practice and function can only be speculative. Since no specific predecessor are known, blood as a patriarchic device, which is to ward out demons, and ritual animal substitutions are both known. But a spring nomadic ritual for protection and fertility of the herds is unattested in the ancient Near East. The blood represents life. Okay, and we will learn this later on when we get into Leviticus and we start getting to know the offerings and sacrifices. Okay, the korbans. And so the blood means life. Okay, that's what it represents. So this Passover, which is intended to give life to those who obey the command, right? So the blood of the lamb is what is important here, because the blood represents life, okay? Blood represents life. Remember that. So the blood of the lamb, the life, is put on the doorpost. And so because the children of Israel and anybody who did this put their life on the doorpost, right, then God's presence will pass or protect. Right? Some people believe that the presence of God will dwell in with, right, which is interesting, because as the angel of death, how is it described in this Torah portion, will go and kill the firstborn of Egypt, not only of men but of animals, right? As this is occurring, the life of the lamb gives protection to the people and gives them access to God and to have God's presence in their homes and midst as a protection. So in the midst of death and chaos, the blood of the lamb, which represents life, is put on the doorpost to protect and cover and give access to Adonai to pass over into the home. Okay? And so in this whole situation, God is saying, hey, this Pharaoh, who you as a community had accepted because you lived amongst him, and he oppressed you. And even in the oppression, he decided to fight against me and oppress you even more. And now I am demonstrating to you that I am the sovereign. I am the powerful, because I demonstrated to your fathers that I was faithful by delivering you guys. Because remember, the first instances of God and the people is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's faithfulness in their obedience, in walking, listening to the voice of God, that has us in this situation where now God remembered Israel. Now God remembered Abraham, right? And now he's redeeming the people. And he's telling the people, I reveal myself to your forefathers this way, in humbleness, and I promise them that I will deliver you. And now I am revealing myself to you as an all-powerful creator. And how am I doing that? Destroying Egypt's cosmological and cosmogonical perspective, and telling them that I am the creator and I control not only earth, heaven, but I give life and I can give death. I'm the only one that has control over this. Okay, so the Lord said to Moses, Exodus 12, verse 1 through 9 says, the month is to be the first for you, the first month of the year. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. If any household is too small for a whole lamb, they must share it on with their nearest neighbor. Having taken it into account the number of the people there are, you are to determine the amount of the lamb needed in accordance with what each person will eat. The animals you choose must be year-old males without defect, and you may take them for the sheep or the goats. Take care of them until the 14th of the month, when all the members of the community of Israel must sides and tops of the door frames of the house where they eat the lamb. When all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides of the tops of the door frames and on the houses where they eat the lambs. That same night they are to eat the meat roasted over the fire along the bitter herbs, bread made without yeast. Do not eat the meat raw or boiled in water, but roast it over a fire with the head, legs, and internal organs. Do not leave any of it until morning. If some is left till morning, you must burn it. This is how you are to eat it: with your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff on your hand. Eat it at haste. It is the Lord's Passover. On that same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on your houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. This is the day you are to commemorate for generations to come. You shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord, a lasting ordinance for 7 days. You are to eat bread without yeast. And on the first day, remove the yeast from your houses. For whoever eats anything with yeast in it from the first day to the seventh must be cut off from Israel. On the first day, hold a sacred assembly, and another one on the seventh day. Do not work at all on these days except to prepare food for everyone to eat. That is all you may do. Obey these instructions as a lasting ordinance for you and your descendants. And when you enter the land the Lord will give you as a promise, observe the ceremony. And when your children ask you, what does this ceremony mean to you? Then tell them, it is a Passover sacrifice to the Lord who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt and spared our homes when he struck down the Egyptians. Then the people bowed down and worshipped. The Israelites did just as it commanded Moses and Aaron. At midnight the Lord struck down all the firstborn of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and the firstborn of the livestock as well. Pharaoh and all his officials, all the Egyptians, got up during the night, and there was a loud wailing in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. The consequences of Pharaoh are prominent and are very important for us to understand and learn from. Because even though we see ourselves as Israel and see ourselves as the chosen and redeemed people, which we are through Yeshua, we have to understand that the representation of Pharaoh is his ego and his stubbornness to not heed to God's voice and God's presence. And it requires a humble heart, right? Because Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and it says that God hardened his heart. And like I explained, you can see the video from last year, which I explained a little more. You can see it both. You can see it two ways. You can see it as Pharaoh's anger and jealousy and resentment towards Moses being the image of God and representing God in destroying Egypt, and that not sitting well with him, because you become this all-powerful man called Pharaoh, and you think you are the son of God, the son of the sun, all right? And you dominate, and you have all these gods, this pantheon of gods to your disposal, and all of them are struck down in your cosmological perspective, and is all through a man with a staff, which represented royalty. So you have that option, and you also have the cultural option, which Ma'at is judging him because he's supposed to maintain order and structure and justice, and he's not doing that. He's being oppressive, he's being unjust, and his heart was so heavy. So in the judgment of Ma'at, and when Ma'at put her little feather on the weight, Pharaoh's heart was so hard, so heavy, because God had judged them according to his own structure. So the only ones that can get in the way of God's presence either coming or leaving is us. We have that ability. We have the ability that we can have the blood cover us. Not literally, of course, but in symbolism. That blood that can cover us and gives us access to life and protect us from death. And we have that through Yeshua. So, like I always say, have a great week. Shavua Tov and Shabbat Shalom.